Happy Sabbath. Oh no, it's not Sabbath. It's Wednesday. Sorry. Happy Wednesday, church. So now it's time for our AY activity, and basically it's Bible sword and Bible charades. So I'm going to explain the game to you. So basically, there's gonna be two teams, and one person has to come up from each team. I'm gonna say a Bible verse. So for example, it might be a Bible verse that says, I don't know, for example, and Jesus wept. So basically, each person from each team is going to have to read the Bible verse, but they're going to read it to themselves, and they have to act it out to their team, and their team has to guess basically what that Bible story is based off that verse and what they act off of. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, so I guess the team. I think so. Okay, so can I get, I guess, 2 volunteers, one from each team? Oh, and you have to have a Bible, please. Bring the Bible.
Like a physical Bible?
Yeah. I guess it would be better to have a book, like the actual Bible. I also have my Bible. So yeah, can I get 2 volunteers, one from each side, please? So can we get 2 volunteers, please? Okay. Okay, no one in the audience, please open their Bibles. Please and thank you. Only these 2 people can open their Bibles. Okay, so the first verse is Luke 19. Wait, sorry. Okay, so the first verse is Luke 19, 2 verses 4, and charge. Luke 19, 2 verses 4.
Act it out. Don't close it.
Thank you. Got it.
That's correct. You basically like guess like what the storyline is based off that verse. Yeah.
Sorry. He's been praying.
Any other two volunteers?
Man.
Rebecca.
Come on, Rebecca.
So the verse is Genesis 4 verses 8. Church.
Can I have a helper? Okay.
Okay, honestly, guys, like we weren't paying attention, so I'm just gonna do it again. Sorry.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. Okay, okay. 1 Samuel 17 verse 51. Church. 17 verse 51.
17 verse what? 51. Oh my gosh. Oh.
David and Goliath.
Again?
What? One there. Yeah, that's right across.
She's even mad. She's like, keep now. She's mad.
Okay, the next verse is Joshua 6 verse 15 to 16. Church. 6 verse 15 to 16.
Sorry, say it one more time, please.
Joshua 6 verse 15 to 16.
Yeah, Ross can turn it down. I said it like what you did.
Because you read your life. Again? No. Again? So I can go? Okay.
So that's all for activity. Thank you for participating.
And the person who won 3 times. You're finished. Goodbye.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I welcome you all to the Me, Myself, and God Youth Revival Series. This is a time of engaging activities, lovely music, health facts, spiritual insights and understanding, and decisions. I thank you all for being here. You could have been anywhere tonight, but you chose to come here on your Wednesday, so I thank you. Our message this evening is entitled Jackal and Hyde. Tonight we will be learning about the believer's new relationship to the law of God after their conversion to Jesus. We will also hear of Paul's personal experience with the law as a believer. Before we begin, let us pray. Heavenly Father, I ask that you would open our eyes to see what you would have us to see. May you open our ears to hear what you would have us to hear. May you open our hearts to receive what you would have us to receive. And may you give us the ability and power to do what you would have us to do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. In 1886, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote a fictional novella titled The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In the novella, Dr. Jekyll, a respected doctor, feels he is battling between good and evil within himself. This battle leads to a struggle within him, leading to his alter ego, Edward Hyde. He spends his life trying to repress evil urges that are not fitting for a man of his stature. He developed a serum in the attempt to mask this hidden evil. However, in doing so, Jekyll transforms into Hyde, a hideous creature without compassion or remorse. Jekyll has a friendly personality, but as Hyde, he becomes mysterious and violent, evil, self-indulgent, and utterly uncaring to anyone but himself. As time goes by, Hyde grows in power and eventually manifests whenever Jekyll shows signs of physical or moral weakness, no longer needing the serum to be released. Eventually, he would become Hyde involuntarily in his sleep. Jekyll, realizing that his alter ego, Hyde, was becoming too destructive and uncontrollable, he tries suppressing him. However, Hyde one day transforms involuntarily during wake hours. His ability to change back from Hyde into Jekyll has slowly vanished. So Jekyll decided to write a farewell letter, knowing that Hyde would soon transform permanently, and not knowing whether Hyde would be executed when caught or choose to kill himself. His letter read, "I bring the life of that unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end." This story, though fictional, has underlying relevance to our lives. This story resonated with me. Like Jekyll, I have felt a battle between good and evil within me. I have experienced a struggle between doing good and doing evil. Perhaps the story resonates with you too, and that you have felt the battle between good and evil within you, and you have experienced a struggle between doing good and doing evil. The Bible addresses this internal battle of good and evil, which is found in Romans chapter 7. Actually, turn your Bibles with me to Romans chapter 7. In Romans chapter 7, Paul begins with the legal axiom. What, everybody? An axiom is a general principle or rule that is commonly known by all people. The axiom Paul uses is found in verse 1, which reads, "Now, dear brothers and sisters, you who are familiar with the law, don't you know that the law applies only while a person is living?" Paul perceived that he would get the attention of his hearers as they would understand this principle of the law applying only while a person is living. He follows this axiom with a marriage analogy in order to explain this axiom. Verse 2 says, "For example, when a woman marries, the law binds her to her husband as long as he is alive. But if he dies, the laws of marriage no longer applies to her. So while her husband is alive, she would be committing adultery if she married another man. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law and does not commit adultery when she remarries. The binding to her husband that the law requires of the woman is conditional. As long as her husband is alive, she is bound to him as a spouse. But if her husband dies, the condition for her being bound to her husband is over, and she is now free under the law to marry another man. Paul uses this analogy to help his primary audience and his secondary audience, us, to understand the axiom that he gave in the beginning regarding the law. He makes his point in verse 4. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, this is the point. You died to the power of the law when you died with Christ. And now you are united with the one who was raised from the dead. As a result, we can produce a harvest of good deeds for God." Now remember, the axiom in verse 1 was that the law applies only when a person is living. Paul says that, but you, speaking of believers, have died to the power of the law. Notice that he doesn't say the power of the law has died. Rather, he says you have died to the power of the law. Paul makes a reference to dying with Christ. We learned the other day that he is referring to baptism, which is a symbolic representation of Christ's death and resurrection. Paul says, you are now united with the one whom was raised from the dead, which is Christ, for a purpose, which is to produce a harvest of good deeds for God. He continues in verse 5 to 6. He says, when we were controlled by our old nature, sinful desires were at work within us. And the law aroused these evil desires that produced a harvest of sinful deeds resulting in death. But now we have been released from the law, for we died to it and are no longer captives to its power. Now we can serve God, not in the old way of obeying the letter of the law, but in the new way of living in the Spirit. According to Paul, the believer's new relationship to the law of God, after they have been joined with Jesus, is to serve God, not in the old way that they used to, by obeying the letter of the law, but they are to serve God in a new way, which is to live in the Spirit. We will be spending some time on living in the Spirit on the next topic. And so after Paul gives his reason for why believers are no longer bound to the old way of obeying the law, which is that they have died to the power of the law when they died with Christ, and were joined to him as his bride for the purpose of producing a harvest of good deeds, which is living a life that is pleasing to God. Paul proceeds to bring up a question that he anticipates might arise in people's minds after hearing this. And as a result of what he had just spoke concerning the law, in addressing what might become a question for some believers hearing this, he says in verse 7 to 8, well then, am I suggesting that the law of God is sinful? Of course not. In fact, it was the law that showed me my sin. I would never have known that coveting is wrong if the law had not said, you must not covet. But sin used this command to arouse all kinds of covetous desires within me. If there were no law, sin would not have that power. Paul is like, I have no problem with the law. When I said that we died to the power of the law when we died to Christ and were joined with him, I was not saying that there was something wrong with the law. In actuality, the law is helpful. It was the one that let me know that coveting was wrong. Or I would not have known, I would have kept coveting. And as soon as the law informed me that I was wrong, sin was like, oh, So we're going to keep coveting even more now that you know it's wrong. Paul makes it clear that he has nothing against the law and that the law is actually helpful. He further explains his interactions with the law in verse 9 to 11, where he says, "At one time, I lived without understanding the law. But when I learned the command not to covet, for instance, the power of sin came to life, and I died. So I discovered that the law's commands, which were supposed to bring life, brought spiritual death instead. Sin took advantage of those commands and deceived me. It used those commands to kill me." Paul is given a breakdown of sin's behavior in response to the law. He said, "I used to live without understanding the law. But as soon as I learned about the law," and the example that he gives is the command not to covet. He says, "When I learned about the law, all of a sudden, sin's power came to life in me." When he didn't understand the law, sin was still resided in his life, but it had no reason to flex its power in his life. The moment he understood the law and knew that what he was doing was wrong, the power of sin came in full mode and took over his life. Notice that Paul didn't say when he understood the law, the power of sin came into his life. Rather, Paul says, when he understood the law, the power of sin came to life. Meaning that it was already in his life. Understanding the law just brought it to life. Sin already had power over his life. He just did not realize it until he understood the power of the law. See, the law is like a mirror, helping you to see what's already there. Sin was claiming its territory over Paul's life. He was under the impression that he was in control over his life, but sin threatened by the law and became defensive. Have you ever been under the impression that you were in control over your life, only to discover, like Paul, that you weren't? This is the reality that is common to the experience of the believer. Paul opens up to us about what happened to him. That the law's command which was supposed to bring life, sin took advantage of it and used it to deceive and to kill him. Sin does the same thing to us. It takes advantage of the law when we come to understand, and it uses it to deceive us. Despite this, Paul says, but still, in verse 12, the law itself is holy, and its commands are holy and right and good. Verse 13 says, but how can it be? Did the law which was good cause my death? Of course not. Sin understood what was good to bring about my condemnation to death. So we can see how terrible sin really is. It uses God's good commands for its own evil purposes. Paul makes the declaration that the problem is not the law, for the law itself is holy, right, and good. And that the problem is sin taking advantage of the law and using it for its own evil purposes, which works against us. This is why Paul presented the way in which he did, the new way of obeying God's law. The believer's new relationship to the law of God is that they obey God's law through a life that is lived in the Spirit, which produces fruit and is seen through how we live. These fruits are known as the fruit of the Spirit. Paul continues, making his case in verse 14. He says, so the trouble is not with the law, for it is spiritual and good. The trouble is within me, for I am too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I am doing is wrong, This shows that I agree that the law is good. So I am not the one doing the wrong, but it is sin living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me. That is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing the wrong. It is sin living in me. I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I never do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart. Do you notice the pattern here of what Paul is saying? Paul is saying I a little too much. He uses the word I about 18 plus times in the span of 7 verses. Paul takes us into his life and highlights the reason for his past failures in his journey with God. Trying to live a life pleasing to God based on what he knows. He highlights his inability to keep the law of God by doing what is right. And he ends up doing that things that he knows is wrong. He ends up doing what he knows or what he doesn't want to do. And how sin is the one responsible for his actions. Because sin still reigns in his life. What Paul is highlighting here is that he's using I 18 times. I want to do what is right. But when I try to do what is right, I find myself not doing it. And when I want to do what is wrong, I find myself not doing it. Paul is saying the wrong that I don't want to do is what I end up doing. When I try to do good, I end up doing what I don't want to do, doing what is wrong. Paul is highlighting our experience as believers. That sometimes we have good intentions, that we know what is right, and we want to do what is right. But when we made it in our minds to do what is right, we find that we end up doing what is wrong and what we don't want to do. Paul is opening his experience to us to know that the reason why we feel like doing what we want to do, the right thing, and end up doing what is wrong, is the fact that we try on our own. Can you sense Paul's frustration? I want to do what is right, but I end up doing what is wrong. I have good intentions, but my good intentions don't always pan out the way I intend in my mind. Can you find yourself in Paul's shoes? Wanting to do what is right, but you end up failing. And you end up doing the things that you don't want to do. Paul says, I've been there. I failed trying to do what is right. In sharing his life, Paul illustrates the point. He highlights in his life that when I made up in my mind to do what is right, I end up doing what is wrong. See, church, when you and I make it up in our minds that we want to do what is right, we will often fail. But when we, with the help of God, decide to do what is right, with God's help, we can do it. And so Paul highlighted his life is that he failed when he tried to do it on his own. And so you and I are trying to do what is right, trying to live the life that we know that God has called us to, then we have to remove the mentality that we have of trying to do it on our own. After all, we live in a world that's about self-will, me trying to do what I want to do by myself. And we learn about this in our theme. about me, myself, and God rather than me, myself, and I. And so Paul continues in verse 24. After realizing that he has failed every time he tried to do what is right, even though he had good intentions, he says in verse 24, "Oh, what a miserable person that I am." Can you hear it in Paul's voice? This is the Apostle Paul. This is one of the individuals that we know was one of the strongest in his faith. When we read about Paul, we see the things that he's accomplished, but Paul is opening up to us. And he's saying that even though you read about me and you read about the accomplishments that I've done, how on fire I was for God, when I tried to do these things by myself, to live the right way, by myself I failed. And he says, "Oh, what a wretched person that I am," in a different version. He says, "Oh, what a miserable person that I am." And then he asks a question. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? I can feel Paul's frustration because I've been there, trying, knowing what is right, trying to do it. But I find that the more I tried, the more I failed. Perhaps you've been there. When, like Paul, you tried, but you came to the realization that the more you try to do it on your own, the more you fail. And so after Paul weeps about how miserable he is, and he presents the question, who will deliver me from this body of death, from this body of sin and death? Paul brings up someone. He answers his own question. He says, "Thank God." The answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord. You see how it is? He says, "In my mind, I really want to obey God's law. But because of my sinful nature, I am a slave to sin." You see, Paul tried to do it on his own. He tried to keep the law. He said, "I want to do what is right, but I do what is wrong." And he ended up failing when he tried to do it on his own every time. Paul's experience highlights that you and I cannot keep the law on our own. And in our sinful nature, because sin still reigns in our bodies. Despite Paul's failures and what seemed like doom, Paul makes an observation from his experience. That in order to be free from this failure of wanting to do what is right, only to do what is wrong, one has to be freed from this life dominated by sin and death. And the person that is going to rescue us, that Paul suggests, is Jesus Christ. He says, "Who will deliver me from this body of death?" Paul answers his own question, and Paul gives us the news. According to Paul, the law cannot save you. Thinking that just as long as you try to keep it, I will be saved, will cause you disappointment. Because it is only in Jesus, only Jesus saves. And those who have been joined to him keep the law in a different way. They keep it through God's Spirit, which is made available by Christ when we join him in his death and resurrection. Paul's answer for how to get the victory over the continuous failures in our lives, to doing what is right rather than doing what is wrong, is found in Jesus. The author in Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one, Jesus, who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin." Jesus knows how it feels like to be tempted, because he was also tempted. But unlike us, he didn't give in to his temptations. He didn't sin as we do. And he says, "I can help you too, if you let me." This is the one who Paul presents to us as able to rescue us from this miserable life and this sinful nature. He brings hope to a hopeless situation. He is the one that Paul spoke of being joined to him for the purpose of producing a harvest of fruits. He is the author of the new way of keeping the law in the spirit that Paul spoke of. And this same Jesus is made available to rescue all of us from the body of sin and death. And so the believer's new relationship to the law of God is that we keep the law of God in a new way. That's through the Spirit. And this is what Jesus made possible for you and I. And so maybe you find a connection between Paul's experience and your own. And you have been comforted by the word of God tonight that there is hope. And that you can identify with Paul that yes, you're not alone. And that if Paul can fail trying to do what is right, then that means that there's hope for you. And so this evening, I ask that those of us who have submitted our lives to God and have transitioned to accept Him into our lives and have made the move of switching over to the Spirit, that our new approach to the law is not trying to keep the law in order to be saved, that is Jesus that saves us. And that how we keep the law is not by obeying the letter of the law, but by obeying it through the Spirit and living a life that is pleasing to God. And so if you've been there, thinking that you're miserable for trying to do what is right but failing, I suggest to you that you submit to Jesus and that you would try to live a life through the Spirit that is speaking to God rather than trying to keep the law to be saved. I ask that you bow your heads with me. Father God, we thank you for Paul's honesty and transparency and opening to us his life, that he wrestled with good and evil, trying to do good, but failing. And the evil that resided in him got the victory. That when Paul cried out, "What a miserable person that I am," that through his experience he learned that the answer, the person that could rescue him from this body of sin and death, is Jesus. And this same person, Jesus, is available to each and every one of us. I ask that you will be with each and every person in here, Lord. For those who have felt like it's something wrong with them, and that why can't they get it together? Why can't they do what they have intended in their mind to do, but end up failing each time? I ask that you would comfort them, and that you will allow them to see that when they try to do what is right, they will fail. But if they allow you to live in them, that you can help them to do what is right. I ask that may that be our reality for each and every one of us. For I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Quinn, for the wonderful word that you gave us. Our closing hymn will be Marvelous Grace, hymn 109.
We ask that you be with us as we depart to our various homes. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen, church. Amen, church. Amen. Thank God for what He's done for us this evening. Me, myself, and God, I just see this. The good intentions that we have that we want to do. It's often not what we do, but the evil that we do. We don't want to do, sorry, what we do. And by the grace of God, He gave us Jesus Christ, which is the answer. So thank you, Pastor Cliff, for that amazing message. God bless you. Just another couple of announcements that we won't be coming here tomorrow. So we'll be here at 7:30 on Friday, God willing. We only have 2 more sessions left in our series, so please be mindful of that. If anybody has any questions concerning baptism, or even about the topics that we discussed so far, Pastor Cliff is here. Also, Pastor Cliff is here to discuss. You can speak to any one of them, and they will get back to you. Yeah, that's about it. Everybody have a good night. God bless you.